Oh, Tamsen, I am so absolutely thrilled to have you today. You've helped some of the biggest thinkers in the world make their ideas irresistible. And yet,
It's so fun. I love it. Yeah.
what strikes me most is your energy.
Hmm,
You
thank you.
make clarity so exciting and feel exciting.
Hmm.
And so, for anyone meeting you for the very first time, how would you describe yourself without using the word storytelling?
Ah, my go-to is usually English to English translator, actually. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes that's internal to external translation. Sometimes it's expertise to everyday. Sometimes it's that kind of expertise to this kind of expertise. But, I saw a very good friend of mine, Kate O'Neill, present actually just yesterday. And she really talked about how one of the things that makes us really distinct as humans is our ability to make meaning, right? And so, the thing is with what I do, these ideas are already incredibly meaningful to the people who have them. And so what I really am doing is just helping them design the way to talk about it so that meaning comes through as cleanly and as purely as possible to the people that they're talking to. So yeah, that's how I would describe it. And I didn't say storytelling.
You've spent years helping others find like that big idea. When did you realize that it was time to start to tell your own?
Oh, so I mean, to some extent, it's inseparable from helping people understand the nature of the work and what I do anyway. So I would say, like, tactically, it lined up with when I started my own message design practice about 9.5 years ago. But at the same time, like, I don't know how to talk about anything without connecting it back to, well, here's what made me curious about it, or here was a thing that I experienced and I was frustrated and I wanted to know. And so I think that one of the things I say in my first book is that every idea has a story because every idea is a story. But the reverse is true as well, right? So that any idea, like, there is always a story that is somehow attached to it. So if I'm trying to get a new idea out to people, or if I'm trying to explain this work to other people, oftentimes it helps to say, well, have you ever had this experience? Or, I got really frustrated when I was in branding and we would deliver this beautiful tagline and the client would be like, "We love it." And then a year later they'd be like, "Nobody's using it." And I would just like, "Why not?" And so, yeah, to me, they're really inseparable. I'm a fairly private person, and I'm a situational extrovert, as I like to say. Another word for, like, ambivert, but deep introvert most of the time. And so it's not really comfortable for me to be like telling and talking about like deep, dark secrets. But I do think it's helpful for people to understand, like, why someone's curious, or why somebody, or how they got involved. Because I just think that gives people a little bit more information about intent and motivation, and just a little bit more about how you see the world. And that, the more that I do the work that I do, that's actually where we align more often, is in kind of that worldview and what shapes it. So
Mm,
inseparable. Long way to say it.
inseparable, inseparable. What's the weirdest, most wonderful connection that you've made between an idea and a human behind it?
Ooh, what a fun question. So, I mean, I would say I mean, I'm relentlessly pattern driven, as you might be able to tell. So I would say, let me start first, because the first thing that comes up is a pattern.
Yes.
And um and let me see what goes from there. And the pattern I would say that I observe is that people try to separate the pieces of themselves in service of an idea. And what I mean by that, for instance, is, I was just talking with a client who, she's been rooting it in her mountain climbing,
Hmm.
but she's also a doctor, right? And so And it's almost like, once we started talking through the idea, I'm like, well, isn't this what you also do as a doctor? And she's like, it is. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened, right? Like I remember there's another, just again, it happens to be a woman. I do work with non-female clients, who, again, I'd seen her over the years and the idea that she's working on, and yet I knew that she had started this world in fashion and design, and yet she was talking about like corporate well-being and things like that. And I'm like, but where is this piece of it? And so I think that kind of the weirdest and wonderful connection to me is actually the ones that people don't see but are already there. Because the moment someone does start to go, oh, that's right, that's true, this is the same question in here and here and here and here and all these different places for so many different people, it takes what they see as being completely different threads in their life, and all of a sudden it helps them make it make sense.
Correct.
And I mean, to me, it always makes sense because you were the person that did it. So there's got to be a connection. I've always started from that assumption. But now that I've said all of that, the one that really comes to mind was I was working with a scientist at MIT. This was about 10 years ago, so it's still pretty early in her career. And she, in her mind, had like 3 different lines of research that she was doing in her lab. And when we just started talking about it, I was like, well, aren't all 3 of these like this? And she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, you've just given me a whole new way to think about the work that I do. And it was super fun because I just had the opportunity to go look her up the other day because someone was looking for someone who does what she does, which is like human machine team collaboration. Like what do you do with a robot or an AI teammate? And like here she's got this like amazing lab and now it's all tied together. And I'm like, that's the magic thing. Like that's my favorite part of this work.
I love that. I am a big fan of patterns as well. Have patterns always come up for you? Do you always see things in patterns?
Yes. I think the biggest thing that I've had to learn is to try to disconfirm a pattern, right? Because I don't want to slot anything I see or anything that I do or anyone that I know or love into. I'm like, oh, this is another piece of the pattern, and it's not. But yes, I mean, I have. I mean, I am the broad autism phenotype. So I don't meet all the all the criteria for autism, but one of the things that is very dominant in my approach is pattern recognition. It has always been it's always been my go-to for trying to understand something that I don't understand is to kind of like quickly scan like my mental files and be like, what is this? What else is this like? Right? Almost like searching for a metaphor or what is this? What does this remind me of? Because maybe it works like that, right? That's been a lot of if this is true over here, is this also true over here? And so I think that was just a natural way that I did things. And then in the nature of the work, it continues to be, right? So if I work with somebody who's in I do a lot of work with scientists, technologists, et cetera. So also other people, but one of my clients came in and it was like, he's like, all the research that I do is about why our brains need sleep. Not just what happens, but when we sleep, because there's lots of folks that are fine, but like, why is that even necessary? And I was like, and why do you think it's necessary, Keith? And he was like, well, because of homeostatic regulation of criticality in the brain. And I'm like, we can't say that to people. You can't say that. So again, I'll like ask questions and then we'll go through it. And in this case, we came up with it together. He's like, well, it's like a thermostat. I'm like, oh, right. Because there's one of my favorite recently discovered quotes or observations is something known as Gall's law, Gall. And he's a systems thinker or theorist, and what he observed, and I happen to agree, is that underneath any complex system that works is a simple system that works.
Yes.
And again, it's one of those that like you say that to people, they're like, yes, that's true, because it is. And even though I do a huge amount of work with people who aren't like scientists and mathematicians and whatever, they recognize that as things like first principles and axioms. But we all operate that way. We all have these kind of like simple, basic rules that we understand how, that we've either learned through experience or we've received in some way. And over time, they've proven themselves out to be true most of the time. So for me, it's about trying to find those common, simple, almost universal elements of what things are doing, because it oftentimes is the path to kind of decoding and translating thing from one domain into another, is to let's get it down to that simplest idea, that simplest system that's underneath it, make sure we've got accuracy and understanding there. And then once we've got that, then we can start to add all the nuance and all the detail. And that process of sussing out what that underlying simple system or simple concept is that is holding up this beautiful complexity, that's where honing any kind of pattern recognition, skill that you might have really comes in handy.
Why do we typically make things so much more complicated than they need to be? Why can't we find or anchor ourselves in the simplicity and be okay with that?
Oh, so I know the first, I know the, I believe I have an answer to the first one. The second one, oh, that's a question for the therapist and the psychologist. Because I think there's actually a really practical, tactical, non-threatening reason why it's hard. And it's actually a combination of things. It's actually something I've been thinking about a lot. So this will be fun to kind of give it voice for the first time and see if I can start to get it even clearer. The first issue in my mind is that is a fairly well-known phenomenon called the curse of knowledge. I mean, you may have heard of this before. It was famously, I think Chip and Dan Heath in their book Made to Stick were probably the people who made it most famous of all. But the curse of knowledge is essentially that once you know a thing, it's nearly impossible to remember what it was like not to know it. And there's a lot of cognitive, reasoning and psychology and cognitive, like there's all sorts of good reasons, all sorts of reasons why, once we've decided that something is the right thing or the best way or the way things are, we kind of dump the whole process of how we got there. So that's the first thing. So we forget the process we went through, both experientially and like in our own heads, to come to that realization, to come to that beautiful big idea.
Mm-hmm.
Second, because we've had all of those experiences and all of those trials and errors and all of this new discovery, this idea is big and beautiful and multidimensional and nuanced and complex. And again, we don't remember that we came at it through simple things. That's fine, because once we've accepted it, we're like, yeah, it's fine. And then you build from there. So in my mind, the way I see it is like these ideas are these beautiful, like clouds, networks of like multiple dimensions. And then when we have to explain it to somebody else, we have to take this beautiful, like, multicolored dimensional thing that's so, even if it's not 100% clear to us, we know it, we know our idea. Like, even if like we could tell you what is and isn't it, even if we can't quite like give it to you exactly. But then we have to put it into words. And that's where the trouble starts. I think a couple reasons. The first, and I think the biggest thing that's hardest about that is that words are linear, meaning I can only tell you this thing one word at a time. Like literally, I have to take this beautiful multidimensional thing and then feed it to you one word at a time. And then and then all of a sudden, so you almost like feel the problem. We've got this big idea and it's got to come out of this like little tiny space, right? And so you're trying to figure out, what do I put through there? And a lot of time it's like, I don't even know. So let me give you all of it and hopefully like the good ones will stick, right? Like that's what we end up trying to do. The second complication with words, and we don't have anything better, by the way, generally. I mean, we've got, more representational things like music and anytime you could add that kind of stuff, the better. But words are abstractions. And I know that sounds like very fancy, but they are so many steps away from what we actually mean, that they're the best we can do in the moment, right? So not only are we trying to take this multidimensional thing and flatten it to like 2 dimensions, right? But then we have to use words that are imprecise and that mean different things to different people, depending on their own beautiful big cloud that's coming into this conversation or reading it in the moment. So I explain all that because I think a lot of times people take it as a personal failing that they can't make something clear like right out of the gate. And I'm like, it totally makes sense why we can't do this, at least without conscious frameworks that help us just kind of make sense of it so that we can make it make sense to other people. So I just try to like make people not feel so bad about it, because it really is a solvable problem once you know what's actually getting in the way. And then once you know that, then it's like, okay, so let's get it down to, it's one of the reasons why I like to find that simple thing. Let's get it down to the things that are at least shaped the way that will make it through this tiny little aperture we have for the words we have to explain it. And then once we've got something through, right, and this is part of where that red thread idea comes through. Once we've got a piece of it through, then now we can start pulling, and allow them to pull more and more and more. And then what we've got now, we've kind of extracted that idea out from your head, like from my head, like, and now it's feeding into yours. But to me, it's like it's a dimension problem,
I
right?
love this. I cannot uh, think of a better way to explain it than what you just dropped.
Yeah,
It's
it's just,
yeah.
I'm like, it's beautiful. And then we've got this little teeny tiny little space, like this little tiny thing that we're trying to get it through. And then you add complications to it where you add time limits and word limits and expertise differences and education differences and just understanding differences and background. And like, it's hard.
It's hard.
And so like that's the first place I've started. It's like, listen, but it's not impossible. And it's hard if you try to take it exactly the way that it is in your head and give it exactly that way to somebody else. That's never going to work. We have to kind of put it through, that's why I call it translation. I think of it as like putting it through, a Google Translate or putting it through a decoder ring. We have to kind of take it down into something else before we can bring it back up into something that somebody else can really get, where that meaning is transferred is actually the first thing that we've got to be able to do, and then we can get all the detail kind of hung on to it.
Oh, oh, lots of noise,
Yes,
thread through the needle,
that's right.
and then make.
That's right.
I
That's
love
right.
I love it. I love it. See, look,
There you go.
there you go. You went from helping others curate their brilliance with TEDx in Cambridge,
Mhm.
and then you decided to step on the stage yourself, which I
Mm.
love, love, love. And we all know that that's a big leap to put ourselves forward. What did you have to unlearn about your own voice?
Hmm. Well, what's interesting is I love the top 10 questions already. I'm loving all this, Allison. So, I mean, I've been speaking in one form or another for 20-ish years. And so, part of the reason why I wanted to do my own TEDx, right? And part of the reason why, I am still an active speaker is because I I think it's really important for me to understand what the experience is like of people that I'm trying to help. Again, whether or not they want to be a keynote or a workshop leader or whatever, it's the way that I understand like the context into which like these various ideas happen. I have to experience that for myself. It's the way to reduce as much of that abstraction as I was talking about, right? Like I can't read in a book what's happening out in the speaking space. I can read about it, but you don't really know it until you're up in front of somebody. And so with my own TEDx talk, I really was like, well, it's not fair for me to put all these other people through it without experiencing it for myself. And I would say the thing that I had to unlearn or rather relearn, to be honest, right, um, is exactly what we were talking about. Is that nothing makes your idea stronger and better than another set of eyes on it or two. So, you can think that it's the like the cat's pajamas. I mean, you can just think it's like amazing, and then it comes out of your mouth, and when somebody goes,
Eh?
which and I'm like, nuts. And so, like, and literally that was my experience like a week before my TEDx, where I was like, took it to some friends of mine who are excellent performance coaches. So Michael and Amy Port. And I remember that was like, Amy's expression was like, and I'm like, oh,
Oh, nuts.
no. And I'm like, and of course I'm feeling all the like, what am I even doing with my life? Why do people do this with me, et cetera? And it's like, and, the thing, they, and once I could understand what wasn't working for them, then I could kind of tap back in and go, okay, here's all right, how about this? How about that? How about that? But so I would say that that's it. I mean, I think I have to, it is a, like many things, patterns. It's definitely a pattern I've had to learn over and over and over again, in all sorts of different ways that you cannot perfect it on paper. Because ideas exist, in the in between. Like this, it's both the challenge as we were talking about, but also the beauty of it. Because, I remember, I think it was a woman I know, who's in a women's collaborative along with me, Simone Oliver. She was a big fashion person for the New York Times, and I remember she said, I think it was her who said, there are more options and alternatives that are available than is possible for me to see. And I mean, the number of times I've had to get like smacked in the face with that reminder is embarrassing, but again, I think it's human. But I would say that that's it, right? Is that you can't perfect it on paper. You've got to put it out there. You probably have to put it out there before you think it's ready, but it's the only way you're going to get it to a point where it's going to sharpen it until it's where it needs to be. And I don't want to devolve into cliches here, but it is one of those things where you got to trust that process to some extent of saying this idea, especially if I want it to help change how somebody thinks, or if I'm helping somebody help other people change how they think, other people have to be involved at some point, right? Like we've got to start getting their reaction to it, because that's the only way to shape it in such a way that works for them.
Oh, I love this. And I love this as a practice. I would like to ask you this. How did you develop the courage to see feedback for what it is, which is a gift?
Mm.
So a lot of us know, like the knowing doing gap, right? We know that if we're going to give birth to something, and we're going to talk about some of your frameworks later, you've got to test it and validate it, and you've got to be really open to seek to understand how other people are interpreting it. And
Yes.
that is a skill, a superpower that not all of
I'm
us.
not great at it. My husband will be the first to tell you. And I mean that with so much love. He's like, you're not an easy person to criticize or get upset. And I'm like, oh, and I hate it when he says that. And because he's not saying it to be mean or cruel. It's just like, because honestly, it's usually given from a feedback standpoint. Because usually I'm freaking out about something. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And then he'll be like, have you thought of it? And I'm like, and then he'd be like, Tamsen, you just asked for help. So I would say that is a lesson I continue to learn as well. And I think actually like as far as learning curves go with that, I would say that I'd like to think that I've had a lot of movement on that in the last year and a half that that I put myself back in school. So I started a doctoral program last summer, and it's in adult learning. And you talk about a beginner's mindset, like, because the topic I may be working on is still the same thing. I'm researching how do we make it easier for other people to adopt new ideas. But the whole context of learning is like, you don't like anything you know is generally the result of you not knowing and experiencing that viscerally, right? Like, so it's like, oh, that didn't work, or oh, that did work, right? And so I think that nobody describes it as accurately or as beautifully as Amy Edmondson talks about it, where she talks about it as the right kind of wrong. And she makes a really beautiful distinction between mistakes and failure. And mistakes are kind of preventable errors with problems with known solutions where like that was a mistake. Like you could have seen that coming a mile away. But failures, one, I'm massacring how she talks about it, but failures, the way I take it away from how she talks about it, is that failures are literally a product of learning, because it's the result of moving into an unfamiliar, unknown situation. And if you frame it that way, there's kind of no way, like, if you happen to get it right, it's freaking luck, right? And which reminds me, I'm just going to go tangential here, that was one of the most important lessons. So I think related to that, let me say that, is
Yep.
that I am really trying to constantly frame feedback as opportunities for learning, because that's really important for me. And also to give myself grace about the fact that, like, if this is new, I'm not going to be great at it. And I can't get better at it unless I keep trying, because otherwise it's not going to happen. But I do feel that we underappreciate the role of luck and chance. And I think that we punish ourselves far too often for things that are just chance. And yeah, everyone's like, oh, make your own luck. But it was a lesson I learned when, one of my jobs was as doing fundraising strategy for Harvard Medical School for several years. And I remember I was talking with a woman who was in charge. She kind of ran the actually ran the office for what's known as systems biology. And she was explaining the role of luck and chance in biology, and that it is, sometimes people say, well, everything happens for a reason. And I'll say, I only agree with that if you include chance as a reason, right? And that's, I think, that also including into feedback and failure, the right kind of wrong, is that allowance for chance, right? That sometimes things just don't break your way. And so what I try to do, even with giving myself feedback, is I really do try to say to myself, did you do the best that you could given the information you had at the time? Because I don't think it's fair to judge former me by current me's learning. Like, that's not fair, right? I can't judge me of 20 years ago by the knowledge I have now. That's not fair. Me of 20 years ago didn't have that experience. And so, or even me of yesterday, right? You don't know until you try. You don't know until you learn. And so it's about, I think, trying to keep that feedback where it belongs, which is helping you bridge from wherever you are to wherever you'd like to be.
And I love how you reframed the difference. And I think it's really important, the difference between mistakes and failure. And I like to frame failure as becoming.
Yes, yes. And again,
That's,
it's Amy Edmondson,
yes.
full credit to her, but yes, yes.
Yeah, because
It's a
that's,
very helpful frame.
yes. Oh, I have a question for you. You described yourself earlier as a message designer. What does that mean?
What does it mean? I think, again, inspired by my friend Kate O'Neill, it literally came to me yesterday. I'm like, I think it's meaning design. But the way I define it officially is it is the strategic development of communications designed to inspire internally motivated action. I'll say that again. So,
Mm.
strategic design
Yep.
of communication. So, again, we're thoughtfully putting that, like drawing that linear string of words, whether they're spoken or their thoughts, right? Or they are written, either way. It's like we're trying to figure out that strategic development of what to introduce in what order and how. Designed, like meant to inspire internally motivated action. Um,
Mm.
and that to me is like really important because, again, one of the things that's inseparable from my own story is that starting as I did in marketing and marketing support of fundraising and sales and whatever, I saw over and over again a lot of tactics meant to drive action or behavior change or thinking change that were, I mean, struck me. It turns out they actually are like coercive, manipulative, the use of like of people's own psychology against them, for instance, or the use of their own language against them, like trapping people in like rhetorical loops. And I'm like, A, not cool. B, doesn't work, right? So I mean, I think you've researched me well, so you probably know that one of my moonlighting jobs during all this time was as a Weight Watchers leader for 13 years, and one of the biggest lessons from doing that was really making that difference between what best practices in marketing, leadership, communication, persuasion was, and then what I saw over 13 years and 3,000 meetings actually worked as far as communicating ideas in a way that created the conditions for someone to go, for engineering those aha moments. Now, I can't ever guarantee that they happen, but you learn a lot kind of that over that amount of time through osmosis about how to at least avoid failure with that. And so to me that's been a huge amount of it too. So that for me, message design is both that practice, but it's also drawing a line in the sand for saying there is another way to do this. And in fact, it achieves for many people what their outcome is, what they're looking for, long-term shifts in thinking or behavior, sustained change. There's another way to do it, evidence-backed.
Mhm.
Like it's based in like solid research, and it 100% conflicts with a lot of what we've been taught. So I figured it needed a new word, or at least something that like intuitively suggests what we're doing, or what I'm trying to do with it. But that's what it is.
I love that. I love that. You've got a framework, I believe. It's the trifecta. I love it. It's the psychology, the reasoning model, and then the storytelling structure. And
Yeah.
when I was looking at that, I love frameworks, love models. But what I was really looking at it is that it's actually a vehicle, whether I'm sure, could be wrong. I'm hoping I'm not, but it's really about the ability to have people being able to be open to receive as well.
Yes. Oh, yeah. You nailed it.
Oh,
Absolutely.
I did? Okay.
That
I don't
Yeah,
know.
you totally did. And that's actually what I love about that is that's a fairly recent. I'm not saying this to like toot my own horn. I truly, but I think
You
it's
toot,
one of the
my
things I
friend.
look. No, it's one of the things I look for when I'm working with my clients is that when they continue to find new things in their own ideas, then that they found something really rich. And so I say that because this idea of just expanding that window of openness
Mhm,
just naturally.
mhm,
And I mean, even though we're engineering that moment or that possibility of that moment, but just to hold it open for a little while longer so that we have this opportunity to get into some level of just so that they're not shutting down about it, right? Like that's really key. I was having a really interesting conversation with an amazing kind of thinker and strategist. Another red thread, by the way. It's fascinating. Her name is Rahaf Harkush, and she runs the Red Thread Research Institute. So we've connected because we're like, red threads. And she introduced me to this concept from political science called the Overton window. Have you ever heard of that?
mhm,
So I love little facts like this. And I'm like, ooh, what's that? And what she was explaining is the Overton window is, in politics and policy, the Overton window is this kind of like mental range of let's say in policies that people would consider to be reasonable, right? Like this is not reasonable. This range of things is reasonable in the Overton window. And, side note, like when we have like authoritarian regimes and whatever, they slowly they slowly move the Overton window over like little bit by little bit by little bit, like little bit until something that was once upon a time would have been wildly outside of what's reasonable. Now is like, whatever. But she was like, "Oh, are you doing that with ideas? Are you helping to kind of expand the Overton window of an idea?" And I'm like, "Yeah, actually, I think that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to I'm working with my clients and my own ideas to figure out how do we, back to this window of like that little tiny thing, how do we feed that idea through that space of plausibility, reasonability, and I mean actual reasonability. Like you can test the idea with your own experience and your own knowledge first, just so that we can, by kind of using familiar things in an unfamiliar way, we just gently expand like how someone can think about something. And that's absolutely it. It is about expanding that moment of openness so that so that we can give it a chance, right? For a long time, I've been a baseball fan for a long time. And I remember one time watching, baseball, there's a very famous thing called the perfect game, right? A perfect game is where no runners, no batters reach base. It means that every time the pitcher throws the ball, like it's caught, right? And like there never makes an error, nobody drops the ball, like no batter makes it from home to first ever. Very
That ever
rare.
happened in real life?
Oh yeah, yeah. So it's a perfect. I don't know. It's like it's not. It's very rare. They do happen. And I remember watching one like, and you'll see like, sometimes they'll be going through, and all of a sudden they're like, you'll see ESPN will like cut in because they're like, we're like at the bottom of the ninth, and this person's got a perfect game going, which is of course superstitious. You don't ever say that because you're going to jinx it. And I remember there was an exchange between, it might have been even between like the classic Red Sox announcers who were, they're talking about, one of them said, most perfect games get broken up in the bottom of the ninth. And the other person goes, no, they don't. They get broken up in the first. Right. Meaning a lot of times we think that the perfect game is perfect, 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 and then the ball gets dropped in the last possible chance. And the other person's point was, no, that perfect game gets disrupted the first time somebody gets on base in the first inning, right? Like that's when it happens. And for me, that's very similar to getting an idea out there. I think we tend to think that, because I do a lot of work in change and change management and change communications and strategic change and all that kind of stuff. And, strategic change and change management, legendarily unsuccessful. I mean, literally, like for 30 years, the percentage of change management efforts that fail, mergers and acquisitions, restructurings, et cetera, has not changed. And the failure rate is like 70%. And with strategic initiatives, I think, the statistic is somewhere like north of 90% fail to reach their goals and their outcomes.
Globally.
It's globally. Like it just, everything fails.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, I wonder if it's implementation. And it's a pet theory at this point. I'm like, I think it's as if it's like, oh, it's failing in the ninth inning. And I'm like, y'all, it's failing like back in the first, because like we are talking about we're introducing these changes in ways so often, again, because of what has been best practice that don't work, and that actually we're setting up the failure at the moment we first introduce this idea. So, one of the things that I say sometimes to audiences when I'm speaking about this is that I can't guarantee that, in whatever amount of time that I have with somebody, that your change is going to succeed, right? Like that your idea or your message is going to succeed. I can guarantee that I can keep it from failing, right out of the gate. Yep. And to me, that comes back to that question you had about openness. It's just like, we've got to give it that, it's seconds. If we just give it seconds more, then we have a chance. Whereas the vast majority of the time where we're talking about an idea, we're explaining our point of view or something in such a way that door closes within seconds and it never reopens.
Mm. 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 Oh, I love this. I love this. I wanted to go off on a different tangent. I might come back to it, but I want to ask you this.
Fair.
Yes, yes, I will ask you. I will ask you about it. I will, because it's going to be a good one. You've let's talk a little bit about like leaders and the experience for
Yep.
leaders. So you've often said that leaders don't fail because an idea is bad. They
Mm,
fail because it's not clear. And
mm,
so what does that look like when people go to work on Monday? What does that look
mm,
like inside a team? What wisdom, what insight, what
mm.
nugget can you give or impart the leaders that are listening?
Yeah. So what I would say that what really isn't clear, because they'll be like, I'm using clear words. Let's hope they are. I mean, there's so many different levels of clear, like that. That's so hard too. It's like one of the reasons why I learned very early on that there's no value in marketing clarity because most people think they're clear, and there's so many different places you can be unclear. There's that. I mean, the easy ones are use terms and concepts that people understand. Full
Mhm,
stop.
mhm,
Second, use the logical frameworks that people's brains expect and align what you explain to that. The simplest one, just to give you an example, is causality, right? If then, cause effect, stimulus response. Babies get it, my dogs get it. Like the thing, you don't even need words for it. But when you say, if you just walk as a leader and you say, we're going to do this, and you don't explain why, then you've only left half of that if then cause effect equation out there. So it right out of the gate doesn't make sense. Right. So at the very least, make sure that there's always a cause and effect. If we do this, this will happen and not a threat. Right. If we want this as the outcome, then we need to do this. Right. And you don't have to say if then, but those pieces need to be there. You need like
mhm,
for instance, like think back to some of our earliest learning, from oral tradition, like Aesop's fables, slow and steady wins the race. The if then there is if you want to win the race, then go slow and steady, right? So those like our earliest examples, our earliest lessons are complete in that way. So that's the second thing I'd say. A, use words they understand. B, at the very least, have those pieces. But the real thing that isn't clear, and this is the laser focus of my work right now and my doctoral research, is the underlying rationale for why you believe that if then.
uh-huh, uh-huh,
So it's
uh-huh.
not just slow and steady wins the race. It's why does slow and steady win the race, right? What about slow and steady? What about races? What about winning? And that's not data and information, by the way.
Mhm,
It's the evidence of our own experience, which is back to those simple principles about how the world works, right? That it's like, uh, you know, and so to me, that's what people actually need to be clear on because it's generally like, so another way to think about it is it's that kind of that classic Machiavellian phrase of the ends justify the means. And so back to what I was just saying, we need to make sure that both ends and means are there. Like if we want these ends, then we need to use these means. But the justifies, don't skip that, right? Because the ends in and of themselves don't justify everything. I mean, we've all had that experience where someone's like, "Oh, the ends justify the means," and you're like, "Not those means." Where like we may agree on what we're trying to do, we do not agree on how to get there, right? Or we may come at something from very different backgrounds, but when we understand what the underlying justification is, then we can at least start to understand each other. So that's the thing where I wish I could give you like a quick example of that. My newest framework is about that. I call it the ITBA, the if then because and
I
is
love
meant
that.
to get there. Is meant to get you there. And but that's what I would say you need to be clear on is not only what's the outcome, what's the if, what's the kind of straight strategy or approach, that's the and then give me not one but two justifications in the because and the and that are belief based, principle based, not evidence and data. You can hang those on later about why those two things are connected.
Oh, I love that. How long did you tinker with your framework?
Oh,
Because
geez.
what I'm tinkering with it. I've been tinkering with some for a while, so I'd really like to know that. But your framework, and you've got a couple, but when you speak about the connection between the goals, the truth, the change, and that
Yep.
action, like that sequence, right?
Yep.
And then I hate to say it because it's such a bandied about word, but it's so true. It's so transformative. I mean, it's so simple, like innocuously simple, but oh my God, does it pack a powerful punch? I mean, that is beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. So that one,
Yes.
that's the official red thread. That's my kind of universal narrative structure, which helps you sequence the types of information in the right order that people's brains are expecting it, right? So that's, a known goal, something people actively knowingly want, an unknown problem that has to be solved first, a moment of truth that kind of makes that realization that a change is necessary, the change itself, and then the actions that people adopted. So to answer your question, I tinkered with it for about 5 years before I wrote the book. So I was tightening it and tightening her for 5 years. That book came out in 2021.
And
It's now 20.
that's the find your red thread, right?
That's Find Your Red Thread. Yeah.
Find your red
And
thread.
then No Rest for the Weary. The book was out and I kept tinkering with it. And I still believe in the red thread as goal, problem, truth, change, action. That is still accurate and it's narrative structure. But the one that I've been really working on now ever since started as an attempt to solve the friction points that people were still having with the red thread, and also to solve what I would see is whether somebody was using my kind of universal story structure or somebody else's. It didn't always work to change. I mean, it might have been beautifully told,
Yeah.
but it didn't always work to change thinking or behavior. And I got very curious as to why not. And so that's where the it book came, because ultimately a story is just an argument in disguise, right? And there's like a long-standing maximum that a story is an argument. And if you think about it, it is like the tortoise and the hare. That story is an argument for slow and steady wins the race. And
Mhm.
so I started going into saying, oh, everyone thinks story is the end. And I'm like, story's not the end. Underneath story is this whole set of beliefs that we only agree with this, what a story is arguing for if it's based on beliefs that we already have. And so that set me off into studying reasoning and how is it that we decide that something makes sense in the first place?
Mm.
Because, and then I started to think like, well, because we need to work on that because we could have the most beautifully told story, we could have the most beautifully crafted change communications, but if it's ultimately arguing for something that people don't understand or wouldn't agree with, even when it's most like even at its simplest, most accessibly expressed form, then the rest of it doesn't matter. So I've been working on that kind of ITBA framework and it's settling in. I'm very confident now about the names of things keep changing, but the elements and what they are and how you get there is pretty stable. And I've been working on, I would say its first form started about 3 years ago. So I'm about 3 years of testing and poking at that one.
Oh, oh. When did say what they can't unhear? When did that show up in your life for you?
So those have kind of always been there. So what's interesting is that I started to write the book, a different book in 2023. I was going to write the book that was going to be like the sequel to Find Your Red Thread. It was going to be like it was like the earliest stages of this idea, and then I shelved it because I needed to work on my business. That happens. B, it didn't feel ready, and it wasn't. And I'm so glad I didn't do that at the time. But because I needed to work on my business, I was like, I need something that's a line in the sand for this other way to do things. And so, it ended up being a very easy, quote unquote, book for me to write because it really is that collection of lessons of my own little, you know, principles that I had collected over the years of doing this work in all these different environments, where these are the things where, as long as even if you don't use any of my frameworks, as long as you don't violate any of these principles, you're going to be okay. Like, I don't care how you do it, but these are the things that if you violate them, your message is very likely to fail. And so it was really just to be able to go, let me just get this out there. Let me just have this as a kind of a manifesto of sorts, Tamifesto, as I like to call it.
I love this.
And it also just, I mean, it sounds weird, but it bought time for this other stuff to happen. So I'm currently debating in a good way with my publisher whether or not to put this stuff into a revised and expanded version, second edition of Find Your Red Thread. I'm leaning towards that rather than like create its own book from it, because it is in my mind all part of the same thing.
Would you ever consider doing a field guide, a companion guide to find your red?
Sure. Absolutely. What would that look like? About what? How, yeah. What would you want?
You know what I love, and I'm a big fan of field guides. You know, there's so many. We read so many incredible books, and everyone has bookshelves just like yours in the back. And then you have to think, where did I find that? Where? Oh, I don't. Where? Who said that? Where was that? Where was that? Where
Yes.
was that? Or you read a book, and you're like, I love this idea. I love this idea, but that's Apple or that's Amazon. How do I translate it into myself? And so, a
Mm.
field guide, what my interpretation is like a user-friendly how-to to interpret Find Your Red.
Mm. That does exist in certain ways, but that's the kind of thing. I meaning I did some things like that as kind of incentives when the book first came out, kind of like worksheets, checklists, things like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, but it would be interesting to do more of a concentrated
Yes.
and combined launch, right? Like, as truly as a published companion thing for the next time around. But yeah, so to be to be continued.
I really got bitten by the field guide bug when Patrick Lencioni did the five dysfunctions of a team. And
Yeah,
brilliant book, but then, you had all of these leaders wanting to be able to take it and interpret it and put it into their Smithsonian style toolbox, but they
yeah,
just couldn't. And so he went back to the work and then created a field guide, a user's guide. This is how you use it. This is what it feels
yeah.
like, what it looks like. This is what you do for yourself. This is an exercise for your team. This is how you make it
Mm.
come alive. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I think I would be in an even better position now to be able to do that, right? Because to me that would make sense in combination with that idea for the second edition. Because again, this whole kind of ITBA kind of idea came out of, again, trying to find additional ways to, different ways to allow people to kind of get into these ideas. But noted. I will take that forward. Thank
I
you.
would love that. I think that's
Yeah,
planting a little seed. Let me
that's right.
let's do a lightning round to end
Okay.
our time together.
Okay.
And time does fly. How is that even possible?
I know.
It's
This
you.
is fun.
It's you. Okay, you ready? Lightning round.
Yes. Yes.
One word that describes leadership today.
Oh, complex.
Hmm. Favorite story you've ever told?
Ooh. It's the joint story of Ignaz Semmelweis and Florence Nightingale. I love that combination of stories.
Oh, the best bad advice you've ever ignored.
Make it simpler. Well, because I do make a distinction between simple and accessible, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I absolutely do not accept that our audiences need things to be simplified. I
Mhm.
think they need things to be made accessible, and that's different. And one of them presumes a lower level of comprehension ability. That's the simple one. Than I have seen with my own eyes and in my own experience that people have. People will rise to the level that you set for them, or they will meet the level that you set for them. And so that's to me where we start at accessible and say, I'm going to start here because that's my job and my work. And then and my job is to work it and get it to be more complex at the speed that works for you. So yeah, make it simple was the worst advice that I ignored. Huh?
Song that always gets you in the flow.
Ooh. Um, gosh, so many. In the flow. That's a really
Hmm.
interesting one. Actually, honestly, it's this. It's a song from the White Lotus soundtrack when they were in Italy. It's a song called Ciao Ciao, which is amazing. Love it.
Finish this sentence. Last one. Leadership without clarity is.
Not leadership.
I've loved our time together. It went way too
Okay.
fast. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So many things I've taken away from you today, but I love that it isn't about having all the right answers.
Mm-mm.
We put so much pressure on ourselves. It's about telling the right story and evoking the right receptivity to it.
Hmm.
I love that.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, yes, it's all about the stories we tell ourselves. But one of the ways to get out of that trap, because sometimes it's a trap, is to start from the perspective of why would something work?
Mm,
Let's figure that out. Like,
that's
why would this work?
such a
And
beautiful anchor.
yeah, and that I think that starts in a whole different place, which I think fundamentally is one that's more set up for future success, which I hope your listeners have.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for spending time with me today.
My pleasure.